This object, known as the Beatitudes Casket, comes from the Royal Monastery of San Isidoro in León. It was one of 6 that was brought here to form the new archaeological museum in 1869. This object is well known because of its iconography, which shows on 3 of the sides the Beatitudes that come from the Gospel of Matthew. That is, the blessed be the poor, for they will inherit the kingdom. These symbols that we can recognize from the late 11th century have been studied by many scholars, including Julie Harris, who looked at them to identify the period that they were made from, probably around 1080, because of the moment when the switch from the Hispanic liturgy became the Roman Rite. John Williams and Angela Franco have studied the style of these figures, and they also place them in the late 11th century. The inscriptions perhaps indicate a slightly later moment, but really the 11th century is a nice round period that we can identify them with. They were once, as I said, in the treasury of San Isidoro de León, and this object is useful because it exemplifies the way medieval works of art change over time according to their owners. So from these 3 sides that include some of the Beatitudes, the 4th side of the casket is what gives us a surprise. When we look at that 4th side, we see not the completion of the Beatitudes, but rather different fragments with Arabic inscriptions. Now, because of those fragments and because we are missing some of the Beatitudes, scholars have long recognized that this cannot be the original configuration of the box. But it hasn't been so clear of how exactly it came together. My team studied it both from the perspective of thinking about the iconography, thinking about the inscriptions, using the help of Maria Antonia Martinez Núñez to be able to read some of those Arabic inscriptions. As you will see, they proceed from 2 different boxes that have been broken up and then reused to form that 4th side. One includes a named figure, Ismael, son of Al-Mamun, he of the 2 glories, is what it reads in Arabic. And we can identify this as Al-Mamun, the ruler of Toledo, from 1043 to 1075. Therefore, we've got a nice firm date around the middle of the 11th century for some of those pieces. And also, because we can recognize this figural style of the animals as coming from the Cuenca workshop, we can really situate that neatly in the 2nd half of the 11th century. The other 4 fragments are not so clear. And in fact, it had been thought that this was Pseudo-Arabic, a sort of pseudo-Kufic decorative script that didn't mean anything until Maria Antonia Martinez Núñez started to study them. And what she has been able to read are just a few words that say happiness, glory, and is a gift to the owner. So this is a generic box, one that would not be made for an individual, but still for the very elite. With being able to identify both the Christian side and the Islamic side with the 2nd half of the 11th century, when my team began to study this box, we thought that it must have been put together probably at about that time. But we decided to do carbon-14 testing on the wooden frame to see if we could narrow it down a bit. We guessed that it would either be dated to the 11th century, when the ivories are from, or the 19th century, when the box arrived at the museum. However, to our great surprise, what we discovered is that the wooden core has a 95% probability of dating from the 14th century. Now, this is what's exciting about doing research, but also terrible. We didn't expect it at all, and now it required us to do additional archival research to see if we could figure out what was happening at San Isidoro in the 14th century that led them to make this box. What we discovered was an inventory from 1331 of all of the relics and all of the indulgences of the monastery. The canons of San Isidoro put this together because they needed funds. They had to reconstruct part of their building, and so they did an inventory of all of the relics of saints that they had and all of the indulgences, that is the pardons, in order to ask for funds from people. And we have a clear request asking for funds for building or for laborers to work on construction that comes from the 14th century. So our idea about this box then is that San Isidoro had preserved these broken fragments of beautiful ivory for 2 centuries, and then when they needed to make a public display and a request for funding, they put all of them together, using the material as their main meaning. As you will see, the Arabic inscriptions are upside down and sideways and backwards, but they weren't thinking about legibility. They were thinking about the beauty and the glory of ivory to make this box come together in the 14th century. The document that San Isidoro sent out into the world said, "To all the faithful of God, whether clerics or knights, and good men and good ladies of whatever places in which this letter might be seen, we order that all those men and those women who join this confraternity and give an amount for construction work or for a laborer, we will receive them as siblings in this confraternity."